She was the most photographed woman on the planet, and nobody ever truly saw her because the woman smiling in every photograph was performing a role just like she did on screen. And behind that smile was a story the world was never supposed to find out. Today, we are telling the full story of Marilyn Monroe. The rise, the glory, and the final night that changed everything. If this is the kind of story you live for, hit subscribe right now, because we are just getting started. She was born Norma Jeane Mortenson on June 1, 1926 in Los Angeles, California, inside Los Angeles County General Hospital. Her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, was a film negative cutter at a local studio, a woman who loved the movies, but could not hold onto her own mind long enough to raise a child. Gladys was in and out of psychiatric institutions for most of Norma Jeane's childhood, leaving the little girl to be passed between foster homes and orphanages like something nobody could figure out what to do with. Her father was never in the picture. His name was never spoken. She grew up in a world that made it very clear from the very beginning that she did not belong to anyone. The Los Angeles of the 1930s was not a kind place for a child with no family and no stability. Norma Jeane moved through at least 11 different foster homes before she was a teenager. Some of those homes were warm, some of them were not. She learned very early that the safest thing she could do was smile, keep smiling, keep being pleasant, keep being easy to have around, because the moment she was difficult, the moment she became a problem, she would be moved again. She became an expert at performing comfort. She did not feel an expert at hiding pain behind an expression that the world would one day call iconic. By the time she was 16 years old, Norma Jeane married her neighbor James Dufferty, largely to avoid being sent back to the orphanage. It was not a love story, it was a survival decision. James was 21, she was 16, and the marriage gave her a roof and a name, but nothing close to the life she had already begun to imagine for herself. While James was serving overseas during World War II, Norma Jeane was working at a munitions factory in Burbank, California. It was there that an Army photographer named David Conover spotted her on the factory floor and asked if he could take her picture. That single moment changed the entire direction of her life. The photographs were striking, not just because she was beautiful, but because the camera seemed to find something in her that no one around her had ever noticed. She signed with the Blue Book modeling agency, bleached her hair platinum blonde, and began building a presence that the modeling world had never quite seen before. By 1946, she had signed her first contract with 20th Century Fox for $75 a week. They gave her a new name, Marilyn Monroe, two words that would eventually become the most recognizable combination in the history of American entertainment. The early years in Hollywood were not glamorous, they were a grind. She was passed around from studio to studio, given small roles that asked nothing of her except to stand in a certain light and smile in a certain way. Executives saw her as a body, not a talent. They told her what to wear, how to walk, how to speak. She was coached and shaped and packaged into something the studios believed audiences wanted, and for a long time she let them do it because she did not yet have enough power to stop them. But something was happening underneath all of that, something the studios had not planned for. Audiences were not just watching Marilyn Monroe, they were feeling something when they watched her. There was a vulnerability in her screen presence that no amount of studio engineering had created, and no amount of studio engineering could replicate. It was real, it was hers, and it was more powerful than anything the system had built around her. By 1953, everything shifted. Gentlemen Prefer Blondies and How to Marry a Millionaire were released within months of each other, and Marilyn Monroe became the biggest female star in the world overnight. The woman who had spent her childhood being passed between strangers was now being pursued by every major director, every major studio, and every major publication on earth. She was on the cover of every magazine. She was the subject of every conversation. She was exactly what she had always dreamed of becoming, and she was more alone than she had ever been in her entire life. Fame at that level does not fill the empty spaces inside a person. It enlarges them. It takes every wound that was already there and stretches it until it is impossible to ignore. Marilyn had spent her entire life searching for belonging, for someone who saw Norma Jeane, and not just Marilyn. And the bigger the star became, the harder it was to find that person. The men in her life came and went. Joe DiMaggio, who married her in 1954, loved her with a possessiveness that suffocated her. Arthur Miller, who married her in 1956, represented the intellectual world she desperately wanted to belong to, but their marriage collapsed under the weight of her struggles and his inability to truly carry them. With her, she fought back against the studio system in ways that were considered almost radical for a woman in the 1950s. She walked away from 20th Century Fox, started her own production company with photographer Milton Green called Marilyn Monroe Productions, and demanded creative control over her own work. She studied at the Actors Studio in New York under Lee Strasberg and threw herself into the method with an intensity that surprised everyone who had written her off as just a pretty face. Her performance in Bus Stop in 1956 silenced the critics who had never taken her seriously. Her work in Some Like It Hot in 1959 is still considered one of the greatest comedic performances in the history of American cinema. But the personal cost was staggering. She suffered multiple miscarriages, each one left a mark that never fully healed. She became increasingly dependent on barbiturates and sleeping pills to manage the anxiety that had followed her since childhood. The same vulnerability that made her electric on screen made her fragile everywhere else. She was chronically late to sets, not out of arrogance, but out of a paralyzing fear that she would not be good enough, that the moment she appeared, she would be exposed as the orphan girl from Los Angeles who had no business being there. On August 4, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found unresponsive in her Brentwood home. She was 36 years old. The official ruling was a probable overdose of barbiturates, but the questions that followed have never been fully silenced. Who spoke to her that night? Why were certain phone records never made available? What role, if any, did the powerful men in her orbit play in the hours before she was found? The answers have shifted and blurred across more than 6 decades, leaving behind something that feels less like a conclusion and more like a door that was quietly closed before anyone could see what was on the other side. Norma Jeane Mortenson came into this world with nothing and fought every single day of her life to build something real, something lasting, something that proved she mattered. And she did matter more than the system that created her ever intended, more than the men who tried to own her ever understood. The most photographed woman on the planet never stopped searching for someone who would simply see her. And that is the part of her story that never stops being heartbreaking. If the story of Marilyn Monroe stayed with you even for a moment, then you already know this channel was built exactly for you. We do not tell the version of these stories that gets printed in the history books. We tell the version that actually happened, the hunger, the longing, the impossible pressure, and the quiet moments that changed everything forever. If you are not subscribed yet, hit that button right now and turn on your notifications, because the next story we are telling is one that you absolutely cannot afford to miss. We are just getting started.